This story is titled, My Daughters Mocked Me for Being a Plumber. All he does is get his hands in people's shit. So I cut them financially, and now they are begging. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Sup Reddit. Buckle up for this wild one. I've been busting my ass 60 plus hours a week to provide for my daughters, who apparently think my career is embarrassing. Let me start with some context. I, 42 male, am a plumber who's been busting my ass for the last 12 years to provide for my family. Yeah, I fix toilets for a living. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills. I found out I was infertile in my 20s, which sucked, but I made peace with it. Fast forward a couple years, I'm doing okay financially. Got my own business, nothing fancy, just me, my van with a giant toilet on the roof, best advertising decision I ever made, by the way, and a growing list of clients. That's when I met Amber, 39 female, at a friend's BBQ. Hot single mom with these adorable twin girls, Mia and Chloe, 17 females now. They were 7 years old at the time, these tiny blonde things, the biggest blue eyes you've ever seen. Their biological dad was some asshole who bailed as soon as Amber told him she was pregnant. He left her with nothing but a text message saying he wasn't ready for responsibility. She was waitressing at 2 different restaurants, living in this crappy one-bedroom apartment where she slept on the couch so the girls could have the bedroom. When she told me all this on our 3rd date, I remember thinking this woman was a goddamn warrior. We hit it off immediately. Within 6 months, I'd moved them into my place. A modest 2-bedroom that suddenly felt way too small with 4 people. But we made it work. The girls were shy around me at first, but I won them over. I'd come home with little toys I'd find at gas stations, or take them to the park on Sundays so Amber could sleep in. Basic stuff. But they started looking at me like I hung the moon. After 2 years of dating, I'd proposed to Amber and started the process to legally adopt the twins. The adoption was my idea. I wanted them to have my last name, to be a real family on paper like we were in real life. The day it went through was one of the proudest moments of my life. I worked like a dog those first few years. Took every emergency call, worked weekends, holidays, you name it. My business grew enough that I could hire 2 other guys, which helped, but I was still the one getting calls at 2 a.m. about backed up toilets in some rich asshole's vacation home. All because I wanted to save enough for a down payment on a house in a good school district. The girls deserved their own rooms, a backyard, and good schools. Then I finally bought a decent house with 3 bedrooms in a neighborhood with one of the best schools in the district. I converted part of the garage into my office, so I could do paperwork after they went to bed. Life was good, busy as hell, but good. As the twins got older, their personalities really started to show. Mia was the artistic one, always drawing or painting or making these little clay sculptures. Chloe was the social butterfly, constantly bringing home new friends, joining every club at school, planning sleepovers every weekend. I said yes to pretty much everything they wanted. Art classes for Mia, new outfits for Chloe's school dances, summer camps, you name it. I was making good money by then. Not getting a yacht money, but comfortable enough that the girls never had to worry about having the right clothes or being able to go on school trips. I even started college funds for them, putting away a chunk of money every month. Amber went back to school and got her nursing degree, so she was contributing too, but I still covered about 80% of our expenses. Fast forward to now, the twins are 17, and somewhere along the way, they turned into these entitled teenagers that I barely recognize. The sweet little girls who used to run to the door when I got home from work? Gone. Replaced by eye-rolling, door-slamming teenagers. The whole attitude. I chalked it up to normal teenage stuff at first. I mean, what teenager doesn't think their parents are lame? I figured they'd grow out of it. It was a phase. So I kept working, kept paying for their stuff, kept trying to be interested in their lives even when they gave me one-word answers. Mia was talking about some fancy art school in New York that costs more than my first house. Chloe wanted to go to Europe with her friends after graduation. I said we'd figure it out, even though the thought of those expenses on top of regular college made me break out in a cold sweat. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe I should have said no more often. But you know what? I was trying to be the dad I wished I had. My old man was an alcoholic who could barely keep the lights on. I grew up wearing hand-me-downs and eating generic cereal with water because we couldn't afford milk half the time. I just wanted better for my girls. Yes, I raised them as my own girls. And for a while, I thought I was doing a good job. I really did. They got good grades, had nice friends. I made sure they didn't get into any trouble. I figured the attitude was just part of the package with teenage girls. I was wrong. Because one day I realized how these girls actually thought about me. So there I was, driving back from what should have been a full-day job. Some rich dude called about a leak in his water feature. Basically a fancy-ass fountain in his foyer. Turns out the guy's interior designer had an emergency, and they needed to reschedule. Normally I'd be pissed about the wasted trip, but the guy threw me $100 for my trouble, so I didn't complain. It was around 3:30 p.m. when I pulled up to my house, a time when I'm usually elbow deep in someone's pipes. The girls would have just gotten home from school, and Amber was still at work for another few hours. I parked my van in the driveway. As I was grabbing my tool bag, I heard voices through the open kitchen window. The girls were home all right, and they sounded like they were having a grand old time. I was about to head inside when I heard my name. Something in Mia's tone made me stop. I crept closer to the window and heard them. "Dad's job is so goddamn embarrassing," Mia was saying, her voice dripping with contempt. "Emma's dad is a cardiologist, and Becca's dad is some big-shot lawyer. Meanwhile, my dad crawls around in people's shit for a living." I felt like I'd been sucker punched. Sure, plumbing isn't glamorous work, but it pays the bills. A lot of bills, actually, including the ones for Mia's fancy-ass art supplies that cost more per ounce than good whiskey. But Chloe's response was even worse. "Oh my god, I know! Remember when he showed up at the choir concert last year still in his work clothes because he came straight from a job? He smelled like pipe cleaner and had dirt under his fingernails. Tyler asked me if my dad was homeless." They both burst out laughing at that. My girls laughing about me because I worked a long day and still made sure to show up for their performance. I stood there frozen, my tool bag hanging at my side. "And he tries so hard," Mia continued, "always asking about our friends and our hobbies like he actually gets it." "Yeah, he's not even our real dad," Chloe added casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "He tries to buy our love with all this stuff, like we'll forget he's just some random plumber mom married because she was broke and desperate." If the first comments felt like a punch, this one was a fucking knife to the heart. Not their real dad? I'd been there since they were in preschool. I'd adopted them, for Christ's sake. I'd helped them with homework, taught them to ride bikes, sat through hundreds of awful kids' movies, and tens of thousands of hours of Disney songs on repeat. I'd held them when they cried, cheered at every school event, and loved them unconditionally for 12 years. But apparently none of that mattered because I fixed toilets for a living. "I bet if Mom had waited, she could have found someone better," Mia said. "Someone with a real job who doesn't come home smelling like a sewer." "Well, at least he pays for everything," Chloe replied with a laugh. "I'm getting him to pay for that beach trip next month. It's like $600, but he'll say yes. He always does." They kept going, but I'd heard enough. I felt sick to my stomach. All these years, I thought I was building a family. I thought those girls loved me. But apparently, I was just an ATM with a plunger. Good enough to pay the bills, but too embarrassing to actually respect. I quietly walked back to my van, got in, and just sat there for a good 10 minutes trying to process what I'd heard. My hands were shaking. I wanted to drive away and never come back. But that's not what a man does when he has a family depending on him. So I pulled myself together, started up the van, honking the horn like I usually do when I get home. I slammed the door loud enough for them to hear and called out, "Hey, I'm home early." The girls appeared in the kitchen doorway, all smiles and innocence. Chloe even gave me a hug, probably already planning how to ask for that beach trip money. I managed to keep it together through the evening. After they went to bed, I stayed up late in the garage, supposedly doing paperwork, but really just sitting there, replaying their words over and over in my head. I'd spent 12 years of my life giving these girls everything I could. 12 years of backbreaking work, crawling under houses, dealing with other people's literal shit. 12 years of loving them like they were my own flesh and blood, because in my heart, they were. And this was what they thought of me, a pathetic, smelly plumber who wasn't their real dad. Well, if that's how they felt, maybe it was time I stopped trying so hard. Maybe it was time they learned what life would be like without dear old fake dad's money and support. That night, I decided to teach them the value of what they had. If they didn't want to treat me like their father, fine. I'd stop acting like one. Their comfortable lives were about to change dramatically. Because this pathetic plumber? He was officially closed for business. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. No more Mr. Nice Dad. No more endless handouts. No more killing myself to impress teenage girls who thought I was a joke. First stop, the bank. 20 minutes of paperwork later, I had a shiny new account in just my name. Then came the big move. I transferred exactly half of our savings into it. I called my office manager next and had her redirect my paychecks, 75% to my new account, 25% to the joint account, just enough to cover my share of the mortgage, utilities, and basic groceries. Not a cent more for the ungrateful brats. The Bank of Dad was officially under new management, with much stricter policies. On my way home, I hit the grocery store. Goodbye, fancy organic milk that Mia swore was the only kind that didn't make her skin explode. Farewell, special gluten-free crackers that Chloe needed, despite having zero actual sensitivity. Hello, generic cereal, store-brand everything, and the cheapest single-ply toilet paper they sold. A bit of poetic justice there. Let them wipe their entitled asses with sandpaper for a change. When I got home, my princesses were sprawled across the living room, scrolling their phones. Mia barely glanced up with a casual, "Hey!" Just hey, like I was the freaking pizza delivery guy. I walked past them to the kitchen and started unloading groceries. Sure enough, Chloe came over, radar activated by the sound of potential snacks. She pawed through a grocery bag and reacted like I'd brought home radioactive waste instead of cereal. "What is this?" She held up the generic cereal like it was a dead rat. "Where's the Honey Nut Cheerios?" "That's what I bought. But we always get Honey Nut Cheerios. This stuff tastes like cardboard. Feel free to buy whatever cereal you want with your own money." She looked at me like I just murdered her dog, then stormed off. Poor baby had to eat generic cereal. Someone call child services. That was just the beginning. Over the next week, I systematically dismantled every privilege these girls had taken for granted. The hot water heater started making that knocking sound that meant the heating element was going. Normally, I'd have fixed it immediately. This time, I ignored it. 3 days later, the hot water was lukewarm at best. Mia was the first to complain. "Dad, the shower is freezing. Can you fix it?" "Nope," I said, not looking up from my newspaper. "Call a plumber." "But you're a plumber." "I'm not your plumber," I replied calmly. "Professional services cost money." She looked confused, didn't say a thing. For their mandatory school field trip, I wrote checks for exactly half the amount, $25 with Dad's contribution, in the memo line. The girls looked at those checks like I'd handed them used tissues. The TV remote died? Not my problem. Wi-Fi running slow? Tragic. Mia's precious art supplies running low? Chloe's makeup dwindling? Thoughts and prayers, ladies. The real showdown came about a week in. Chloe ambushed me during a basketball game, suddenly all smiles and daddy this and daddy that. She hadn't voluntarily sat that close to me in months. Turns out Princess needed $600 for some beach weekend with her friends. The way she said, just $600, like it was pocket change. This from a girl who'd never worked a day in her life. I hit her with a simple, no. The silence that followed was downright nuclear. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process this unfamiliar word. "What do you mean, no?" she finally managed. "I mean no. I'm not giving you $600 for a beach trip. If you want to go, pay for it yourself." Her face went through a fascinating transformation. Shock, confusion, anger, and then an attempt at manipulation as she forced tears into her eyes. "But Dad, everyone's going. You always let me go on trips with my friends. Why are you being like this?" I finally looked at her. "You're 17. If you want money, get a job like I did at your age." Round 1 to Dad. Amber emerged from the home office minutes later, looking confused as hell. When I told her I'd denied Chloe's beach trip cash, she stared at me like I'd suddenly grown tentacles. Can't blame her. In 12 years, I'd never refused the girls anything substantial. "New rules around here," I told her. When she asked about it, I told her we'll talk later. She got it. Something was wrong. So she nodded and stayed silent. At this point, I didn't immediately tell her what happened because I wanted to test her too. The real test would be whether the girls figured out why I'd changed or if they'd just write me off as suddenly turning into an asshole. Either way, I wasn't backing down. 2 weeks into my new I'm not your personal butler lifestyle, and our house had turned into something between a Cold War and a reality TV show. The girls were having full-blown existential crises over having to use single-ply toilet paper, and Amber was stuck playing Switzerland, completely baffled by my transformation. The Wi-Fi was spotty at best because I hadn't paid for the upgrade when our introductory rate expired. The fridge was stocked with off-brand everything. The lawn was getting shaggy because I hadn't mowed it in 2 weeks. The list of minor inconveniences grew by the day, and with each one, the girls' attitude toward me got nastier. Let me paint you a picture of what breakfast looked like in those days. Me, at the head of the table, smugly hiding behind my newspaper. Yeah, I'm old school, while sipping coffee. The girls, huddled at the opposite end, giving me death glares while choking down their generic Toasty-O's that apparently taste like cardboard soaked in sadness. And Amber, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. My youngest actually complained, loudly, for maximum dramatic effect, that her cereal tasted like the box it came in. Without looking up from the financial section, I helpfully suggested the Kroger 2 miles away was hiring cashiers at $12 an hour, and 4 hours of work would buy enough name-brand cereal. She gave me an eye roll and called me a jerk. I just shrugged and said, must run in the family. Amber nearly choked on her coffee. Chloe's missed beach trip triggered what can only be described as the teenage apocalypse. She spent the entire weekend perfecting her martyr routine, making sure everyone within a 5-mile radius knew she was literally dying of embarrassment and social rejection. Door slamming, tragic sighing, and proclamations that this was the worst thing that has ever happened to anyone ever. When she declared at dinner that all her friends now thought she was a complete loser, I couldn't help but offer some perspective. Worse than breaking your arm in 3rd grade? Or that time you had pneumonia and spent a week in the hospital? Or when Mr. Whiskers the guinea pig died and you wore black for a week? She glared at me like I'd suggested she give up oxygen for Lent. But the real drama explosion happened when Mia's art teacher called me at work. Apparently there was some emergency involving art supplies that weren't in her backpack for a major project. In the old days, I would have abandoned a paying job, raced to the art store like my car was on fire, and personally delivered the supplies with a bow on top and possibly a marching band. Instead, I informed the teacher I was in the middle of unclogging someone's toilet and Mia would need to figure something out herself. That evening, Hurricane Mia stormed in, threw her backpack on the table, knocking over my perfectly arranged bills, and announced she'd gotten a 0 on her project because I didn't respond to the SOS call. That's unfortunate, I said while sorting the bills. Unfortunate? That's all you have to say? Ms. Patel called you. Why didn't you bring me what I needed? I set down my pen. Why didn't you make sure you had what you needed before the due date? Why is your poor planning suddenly my emergency? She stood there, staring at me, then left to her room, mumbling things under her breath. This wasn't about hurting her. This was about teaching her that the real world doesn't give a crap about your excuses. That night, Amber cornered me in our bedroom, demanding to know what alien had clearly possessed her husband. What is going on with you? The girls are miserable. The house is falling apart, and you're acting like you couldn't care less. Time to lay my cards on the table. I told her everything. How I'd heard the girls that day, what they'd said about my job being embarrassing, about me smelling like work, about not being their real dad, about how I just tried to buy their love. With each detail, Amber's face changed. She looked angry and ashamed. They said that? Both of them? Yep. And laughed about it too. Amber was quiet for a long moment. They need to apologize, she finally said. I laughed, then told her an apology wasn't enough, that they need to learn how to respect the one who's been working like a dog for them to have a comfortable life. By the end of week 3, the mood in the house had gone from tense to downright hostile. The girls were barely speaking to me. Amber was caught in an impossible position trying to mediate without taking sides, and I was standing my ground, refusing to back down despite the nuclear-level angst radiating through our home. Then things finally exploded when Mia's fancy art school application deadline loomed on the horizon. Art school had been her dream since forever, and I'd been saving for years to help make it happen. These top art schools cost about $70,000 a year all in, basically a luxury car payment every month for 4 straight years. But I'd been ready to work myself into an early grave to give her that opportunity. I was cleaning my work boots one evening when Mia started hovering nearby. I could practically hear her brain trying to figure out the best angle to approach me. After a few minutes of awkward lurking, she finally cleared her throat and asked, "Dad, can I talk to you about something?" I didn't look up. "Sure. So, the applications for art school are due next week, and I need to pay the application fees." "Okay." She waited, but I didn't say anything else. Just kept working on my boot. "It's $250 for RISD, $125 for Pratt, and $100 for SVA," she continued. "So that's $475 total." I nodded, still not looking up. "That's correct math. So, can I have the money for the application fees?" she finally asked, her voice small. Now I looked up. "No." The look on her face was priceless. Complete and utter disbelief. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no, I'm not giving you $475 for application fees. But this is my future we're talking about." Her voice rose. "You know how important this is to me. If it's that important to you, you'll find a way to pay for it yourself. How? Not my problem. But if you're looking for suggestions, McDonald's is hiring. So is the coffee shop across the street. The grocery store down the street has a sign in the window. Plenty of options. Her face crumpled. Why are you being like this? I'm so sick of it. I finally laid it all out. Told her I'd heard everything she and Chloe said about me. Her face went pale. Dad, I'm sorry. We were just being stupid. We didn't mean it. Bullshit. You meant every word. And that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But actions have consequences. You don't get to treat me like garbage and then expect me to hand over hundreds of dollars whenever you want something. But my art school is still an option. Get a job. Save up. Apply next year if you have to. Or apply to cheaper schools. Or get student loans like millions of other kids. I hear the community college has a decent art program. She looked at me like I'd suggested she cut off her own arm. Community college? Are you kidding me? After all my hard work? Welcome to the real world. Sometimes you have to adjust your expectations based on your resources. It's a valuable lesson, one I learned when I was a lot younger than you. That evening was pure chaos. Lots of crying and door slamming. Later that night, Amber cornered, asking if I was taking things too far. I reminded her that Mia's future wouldn't evaporate if she applied next year or went to a school she could actually afford. Then Amber suggested I was being too harsh. I understand you're hurt by what they said. I am too. But they're just kids. Kids say stupid, hurtful things they don't mean. They're not kids. They're 17, old enough to work, old enough to drive, old enough to know better. And they didn't just say stupid things. They revealed what they really think of me, of my job, of my role in this family. I'm not going to let that slide. She was quiet for a long moment, then asked about the application fees. She said if Mia doesn't apply now, she'll have to wait a whole year. Then she waits a year. Or she figures out how to earn the money herself. Or she applies to schools she can actually afford. There are options, but none of them involve me handing over cash to someone who thinks I'm a joke. And what about Chloe? Are you going to punish her too? It's not punishment. It's a life lesson. And yes, the same rules apply to both of them. No more handouts. No more free rides. They want something. They work for it. The next morning, Mia showed up at breakfast with puffy red eyes, looking like she'd gone 10 rounds with insomnia. Then Chloe followed. They both started apologizing, but this time it seemed like they started getting it. When they asked what they could do to fix things, I knew I finally had their attention. I laid out my terms. Both girls needed to get jobs. They wanted spending money, new clothes, application fees, time to earn them like every other kid whose parents weren't millionaires. Mia tried protesting about how they had school and activities, but I reminded her that millions of teenagers manage to balance all three without spontaneously combusting. You'll figure it out, I said flatly. Later that day, I overheard the girls in Mia's room through our paper-thin walls. Chloe was acting like I'd suggested they take up coal mining, whining about how most of their friends didn't have to work. But Mia actually surprised me, telling her sister that we'd screwed up and now we needed to fix it. When Chloe asked if I hated them, Mia said something that gave me a sliver of hope. No, I think we heard him, and now he's trying to teach us a lesson. I walked away with a tiny smile. Maybe these girls weren't completely lost causes after all. So it's been about 2 months since Operation Reality Check began, and holy shit, what a transformation. If you'd told me back then how things would turn out, I wouldn't have believed you. But here we are. The Monday after our big confrontation, Mia came home with a job application from the coffee shop near her school. She filled it out that night, and I helped her prepare for the interview. Not because she asked, but because despite everything, I still wanted her to succeed. Baby steps and all that. Chloe was more resistant. She spent a few days sulking and complaining before Mia finally dragged her to the mall and made her apply at 5 different stores. She ended up getting hired at McDonald's, which was a massive blow to her social status. She cried the night before her first shift, saying her life was literally over and she would literally die if anyone from school saw her in the uniform. She didn't literally die, though she did come home that first night looking shell-shocked, smelling like fry grease, and nursing a minor burn on her arm from the fryer. People are so rude, she said, collapsing onto the couch. This guy yelled at me because we were out of sweet and sour sauce, like it was my fault. Welcome to the service industry, kid. Now you know how it feels when someone treats you like you're beneath them. 2 weeks into their new jobs, both girls were exhausted and humbled. Working 15 to 20 hours a week while managing school and activities was no joke. Then came payday. I'll never forget the look on Mia's face when she got her first check. $283.47? That's it? For 2 weeks of work? Now imagine trying to support a family on that. I said. She stared at the check, then at me, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. Is this Is this what you started out making? As a plumber? Less, actually. My first job paid $7.25 an hour. I worked 60 hours a week and still barely made rent. For perhaps the first time, she looked at me and saw not just her dad, but a person who had struggled and sacrificed and worked his ass off to get where he was. The following week, Mia handed me $250 for her RSD application fee. She'd decided to apply to just one top school instead of three, and she'd earned every penny herself. I want to pay for the rest of my applications next year, she said. If I don't get in this time, I'll save up and try again. I nodded, respecting her plan. That's a solid approach. Chloe's transformation was slower but no less significant. After a month at McDonald's, she came home one day and announced, "I'm applying for a hostess job. The tips are better, and I won't smell like fry grease all the time." She got the job and quit McDonald's. The hostess position suited her better. She could use her natural social skills. And yes, the money was better. She started saving for a car, opening her own bank account, and putting away a portion of each paycheck. Both girls began contributing to household expenses, not because I demanded it, but because they offered. Nothing major, just $200 a month each toward rent, which I secretly deposited into their college funds. They didn't need to know that part yet. The lesson was in the giving, not in where the money ultimately went. More importantly, they started showing appreciation for what they had. The complaints stopped. They began buying their own name brand stuff when they really wanted it, and suddenly it wasn't such a big deal to have store brand everything else. Funny how that works. The most surprising change was in how they treated me. The eye-rolling and door-slamming stopped. They started asking about my day, and actually listening to the answers. Mia even asked to ride along on a job one Saturday, curious about what I actually did all day. She watched me replace a water heater in some mansion, getting her hands dirty, helping me carry out the old one. The real test came last week, when Chloe's phone died. The screen shattered after she dropped it, and it wouldn't turn on no matter what she tried. The old Chloe would have immediately demanded a new one. The latest iPhone, of course, nothing less would do. The new Chloe came to me with a different approach. "Dad, my phone's broken. Can you help me figure out the cheapest way to replace it? I have about $300 saved up." I was so proud. "Let's look at options," I said. "There's a repair shop that might be able to fix the screen for less than a new phone would cost." We went together and got a quote, $175 for a new screen. She paid for it herself, waited patiently for the repair, and was genuinely grateful when it worked. Small victories, but they add up. Amber has noticed the changes too. At first, she was caught in the middle, torn between supporting me and protecting her daughters. But as she's seen the positive effects, she's come around. "They're different people," she said last night as we were getting ready for bed. "More responsible, more thoughtful." "You were right. They just needed to learn the value of hard work and money," I replied. "And to stop taking everything for granted." She smiled at me, "Including their dad." "Including their dad," I agreed. That brings us to today. We're not perfect, but we're making progress. Real, sustainable progress. Both girls are keeping their jobs even though I've started covering some of their expenses again. They've learned to budget, to save, to think twice before asking for something they want but don't need. They've developed a work ethic that will serve them well throughout their lives. More importantly, they've learned respect. For me, for their mom, for themselves, and for everyone else who works for a living. They no longer look down on the plumber, the cashier, the fast food worker, because they've been on the other side of that counter. As for me, I'm proud of them. Proud of how they've stepped up, how they've grown, how they've owned their mistakes and worked to make amends. They're becoming the kind of people I always hoped they would be. Hardworking, responsible, compassionate. Do I regret how I handled things? Not for a second. It was tough. It was uncomfortable. It damn near broke us as a family for a while there. But it worked. I didn't lose my family. My family didn't lose me. And that's the real win. Edit. Thanks for all the awards and comments. To answer some questions. 1. Yes, I legally adopted the girls when they were 7. So I am their father in every way that matters. Legally, financially, and emotionally. 2. No, I don't actually make them pay rent. The $200 each contributes goes straight into their college funds. They don't know that yet. 3. Yes, Mia got into RESD. The acceptance letter came last week. We're still figuring out how to pay for it, but I'm insanely proud of her. 4. No, my wife doesn't make much. She's a nurse at a nonprofit clinic, so her salary is lower than average. I do make about 3 times what she does, which is why I've always covered most expenses. 5. Yes, my plumbing business is doing well. I have 5 employees now, and we specialize in high-end bathroom remodels. Not exactly just a plumber anymore. Update. Just overheard Chloe defending me to her friend who made a joke about plumbers. My dad makes more than your accountant, Dad, and he doesn't have to sit in a cubicle all day. Progress, people. Progress.